When we hit the small cap alts, that's when you get the true face melting alt season. So where are we on this map? Well, we just completed phase 1, the Bitcoin phase, and the handover to Ethereum hasn't even happened yet, let alone the move into the altcoins. To give you perspective, in 2021, the rotation from Bitcoin to ETH started about 10 months before the end of the cycle. That's when ETH broke 1,400 and went to its previous all-time high of $4,800. 10 months is plenty of time for money to flow to ETH, then to the large cap alts, and then to the small cap alts. We've just started the first part of the flow from Bitcoin into ETH. And if this cycle isn't different, then how will the money flow into the large cap alts and then the small cap alts in 8 weeks? It's not possible. In fact, this again points to a longer cycle. It could point to another 10 months or maybe even another year from here. Another data point I'm looking at is the Bitcoin dominance. Remember, the Bitcoin dominance chart shows how big altcoins are relative to Bitcoin. And in every cycle, when the alt season starts, the Bitcoin dominance falls off a cliff as people leave Bitcoin and fly to the altcoins for returns. In 2017, the Bitcoin dominance chart fell off the cliff in March, and the cycle topped 10 months later in December. In 2021, again, the Bitcoin dominance fell off a cliff in March, and the cycle ended, well, 10 months later. Now let's look at the Bitcoin dominance chart today. You can see that this chart is just falling off the cliff. It literally just happened. That would give us at least another 10 months of the cycle. Another super important signal, if you want to know when the market's dangerously overheated, is leverage. Because generally towards the end of the cycle, in the euphoric period, people tend to believe that the cycle is going to last forever. And when they do, they get comfortable taking leverage. You can see it in the funding rates. When we get market tops, we get extended periods where the funding rates are high. And when the bubble pops, that's known as the deleveraging events. Right now, funding is neutral. In fact, we haven't had heated funding for months. If this market cycle really is ending soon, surely we'd see it in the leverage. And right now, in the leverage, we're seeing nothing. So pretty much every crypto chart is telling us the same thing. It's telling us that the euphoria hasn't even started. And when the euphoria starts, we still have months until the end of the cycle, maybe even 10 months. Okay, so the on-chain data is clear and the crypto data is clear. And that data is telling us that there's no way that the cycle is ending in 8 weeks, and that in fact, we may have 10 months left to go. But what about the macro environment? Because ultimately, the macro environment is the ultimate driver for any market, right? In 2020, the bull market was started because the Fed was printing money in response to COVID. Then in 2022, when the Fed started tightening, that killed the cycle. Pretty simple. Bitcoin always follows the Fed cycle, and it peaks after the Fed has dropped rates and when the Fed begins to tighten. First rates drop, then Bitcoin runs, then rates tighten, and then Bitcoin drops. So where are we today? Well, today we're just on the verge of the easing cycle. In fact, the data is telling us that there's a 95% chance of the first real rate cut in September. And if we start cutting rates in September, we could forecast that rates would be reduced over a period, say at least a year period. That would give us at least another year of this bull market. There's no way the cycle's ending in 8 weeks. The last thing that I want to look at is global liquidity. Because it's not just about rates, it's actually about liquidity. I mean, we've all seen the famous M2 money supply chart and how Bitcoin lags this chart for a few months. Well, this chart's going up only, and there's no drop in the next 8 weeks. In fact, the data again shows that this should increase for another year before any major drops. The macro landscape isn't a headwind anymore. In fact, it's become a massive tailwind, which is going to extend the cycle, not compress it. So let's put it all together. I know some of the biggest names in the space are calling for the cycle to end soon, but the data isn't supporting that thesis anymore. You see, market tops are periods, and in these periods, certain dynamics need to play out for the market to top. You need sustained periods of euphoria. That sustained euphoria drives confidence. That confidence makes people rotate from Bitcoin to ETH and ETH to the altcoins. That rotation pumps the prices of the smaller illiquid coins and drives greed and exuberance. That greed drives people to take more risk, and ultimately they take more leverage. And that's what ends the cycle. All of this takes time, way more than 8 weeks. And it can only happen under the right loosening macro conditions, which are just starting now. Guys, in my assessment, this cycle has to be different. It's going to be much longer, at least 12 months longer. And since it's powered by institutional flows and not retail flows, it's probably going to be way bigger. So I'm calling the cycle the ultimate ultra cycle. and it doesn't end anytime soon. It's changed how I view my portfolio, it's changed how I view my extra strategy, and it's changed the way that I'm trading. And I'm going to share all those changes right here on the channel, and they're going to be huge. So if you haven't already subscribed, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because a lot of things are going to change.